drug policies and human rights on the African continent and Europe are advocating the continent of Africa reconsiders the current draconian drug regime that punishes problematic drug users. According to them, the experts comprising of Niam Eastwood of Drugs, the Law and Human Rights, a civil society organization, and Jamie Bridge of the widely acclaimed International Drug Policy Consortium are questioning why the African continent continue to rely on legislation that they think push culprits in jail when what they need actually is rehabilitation. The call was made on the sidelines of an expert workshop that seeks to put together a model law for the West African sub-region here in Accra.
It's a complicated message to get across, and to get across to people that this isn't about being soft on drugs. This isn't about giving up. It's about being more effective and actually trying to help people. But it's difficult. It's difficult to tell people that the way that we've been doing things for 50 years is wrong.
How has the political establishment received this message from your outlet?
I mean, it's a very good question, and it very much depends on the individual. We have some, even within the commission itself, senior political figures who are very supportive of this message and fully understand and fully agree. You have many other politicians who they agree on a one-to-one basis. They understand the concerns, they understand the point, but they're so concerned about public opinion in the elections. And I'm not just talking Ghana, I'm talking all around the world. So concerned about public opinion. And that's why, for example, the media and all of the way that we think about drugs has to change. And then when politicians feel that it's safer to have this honest conversation, then you'll find that change can happen much quicker.
I don't know any country that can boast of having a robust treatment system.
Senegal is doing well, you would say?
Well, Senegal is doing well in one regard. Senegal is doing well in terms of harm reduction. It's the only country in the sub-region that has methadone, that has needle and syringe programs for people who are addicted to opioids.
Why is that difficult for other countries in the sub-region to emulate?
It's a good question. It's a good question because some other parts of the continent, East Africa is doing quite well. Tanzania has harm reduction programs. Kenya does. And now Uganda is going to begin some programs also. West Africa, only one country out of so many countries in the region, about 15 countries. I don't know, why is it? It may be our attitudes towards drug use are different. It is probably also that the use of opioid analgesics or opiates like heroin, it's very low usage. And probably we also don't understand what may be happening because the response in a place like Tanzania was due to the association between injecting drug use and HIV. And we have injecting drug use, obviously, in West Africa, in all the countries, but probably it's not clear to many people that this may be helping to drive the HIV epidemic, and not only HIV, but also hepatitis B and C.
What we really need to do is use evidence to show people that cannabis is less harmful than, say, tobacco or alcohol. And at the minute, cannabis is really the purvey of the criminal market. And so we have no control over it. So if children want to get their hands on it, all they need is some money to pay for it. And actually, if we change the law and we end criminal sanctions so that people feel that they can get support if they need it, and then explore whether we should regulate cannabis and whether we should put in age controls and product controls in order to protect people from the really harmful type of substances that are out there.
If people are organised crime are involved in the drugs market and they are violent or they are involved in corruption or money laundering, clearly we need to address that. I'm not saying there is no role for enforcement, but particularly for people who use drugs, for drug users, an enforcement approach historically around the world, it seems that it not only doesn't work, it doesn't get rid of drugs, it actually makes things worse. It can encourage more risky behaviors.
In Ghana, for instance, users you go into prison for not less than 5 years. If you're a dealer, you're going in for not less than 10 years. What do you make of this sentencing regime?
Well, the sentencing regime to me seems crazily harsh. It's very, very strict.
So that's the conversation that's ongoing. Well, joining me via Skype is the African consultant of the International Drug Policy Consortium, Maria Goretti Ann. Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us here on the Pulse. If you can hear me, take us through the very practical benefits of legalizing drugs like marijuana, what here we term as illicit drugs.
Let me first of all say that the call is not to legalize drugs, but the call by civil society is to decriminalize drugs. And when we say decriminalize drugs, we are saying that remove the criminal sanctions that are meted out to vulnerable people, and that they should no longer receive criminal records. Now, what are the benefits? The benefits are that people who commit non-violent offenses are no longer going to go to prison for their offenses, and thereby creating an environment where people who are stigmatized for their drug use will no longer receive that stigmatization for the purpose of their criminal records. Now, it also creates an avenue for people to seek health services, because the fear of arrest makes a lot of them unable to seek health services. And that exacerbates their problem, because we know that people who inject drugs are vulnerable to HIV infections, hepatitis. And so when you decriminalize, you create an environment for people to be able to walk into facilities to be able to seek for help. That is what we are calling for as civil society.
That sounds like quite convincing, but it will be very difficult to push this through our legal framework, especially in Africa. I can say so on authority for Ghana, for example, but then this requires certain infrastructure. It requires certain basic or certain foundational inputs that will make sure that it supports the kind of legislation you're calling for. We don't have, for example, rehab centers here in this country. We have just a very few. How is your consortium putting that into your advocacy? What are you doing on that level as well?
Currently, as an advocacy group, we are engaging with governments at the national level. And if you recall, Ghana is currently looking at a narcotics convention bill, and negotiations are currently going, discussions are currently going. I agree with you perfectly that structures are always a problem. And I will say that Ghana, it isn't that we don't have the structures. We have, but they are not adequate.
Right.
Currently in the country, we have civil society organizations that are running treatments and rehabilitations. The state itself has facilities such as the psychiatric hospital, which, in natural fact, we have always advocated that psychiatric hospitals are not meant for substance abuse disorders. And so I believe that we can start from somewhere. We cannot say that because we do not have adequate facilities to start running some of these things, it's not possible. And let me also make it clear that 20% of people who use drugs are problematic users. The rest of the 80% are recreational users. So it's not everybody who needs to go into treatment or rehabilitation. Some will just need to go for some counseling, some educational programs to let them understand the impact of their drug problem instead of lashing them all in prison.
I see. Well, I hope this goes a very long way. But finally, if you have one word for legislators here, for example, in Ghana, what would be that word?
Reform, legislative reform to ensure that people who use drugs are not criminalized.
Is that convincing enough to a legislator in Africa, in Ghana, you think?
I think it is.
Okay, we'll leave the conversation there and leave them to judge on that. Thank you very much. Maria Goretti Ann is the African consultant of the International Drug Policy Consortium, and they are looking to decriminalize the use of drugs because they believe that there are a few benefits that it can have for